I'm Mary Crowley, and this is Mostly Arts. Today I have as my guest Alastair Stout, organist and composer who grew up in the Shetland Islands. He is also director of music ministries at Grace Congregational Church. And we're going to be talking about what's coming up in the spring. So let's talk about Between Blue Mirrors, the piece you wrote.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks for inviting me onto the program.
I'm
always
delighted.
a pleasure to chat with you. So, we're doing a piece this spring, which I wrote about 25 years ago when I was living in London, and it was a piece that was commissioned by the Shetland Choral Society. So I grew up in the north of Scotland, in the Shetland Islands, which are about 3,000 miles as the crow flies from Vermont, kind of in a northeastern direction. So they lie midway between Scotland, the top of Scotland, and Norway. It takes about 14 hours to get to Shetland from the tip of Scotland on a boat, and about the same distance to get across to Bergen in Norway. So we're way up there in the middle of the North
Absolutely.
Atlantic. Very fierce, rugged environment. But for a little boy growing up in Shetland, it was an incredibly exciting place to live, what with the weather and the sea and the landscapes and things like that. So in 1999, the Tall Ships Race was using Shetland as one of their locations. So, tall ships are these massive, masted, open ships that are sailors have basically sail between the different ports around England and Scandinavia. And so they're wonderful ships. I mean, they're majestic and beautiful, and you've probably seen them. They've usually got 3 or 4 masts.
I saw some pictures.
Nests.
I went online to see some photographs.
So you can
Impressive.
imagine when, during a race, there are many, many tall ships. So to see these tall ships approach Shetland and the various ports, it is the most fantastic sight. And Shetland, I think, has hosted the tall ships 3 or 4 times. And 1999 was one of the first times it did this. So there's a group on Shetland called the Shetland Choral Society, which are a wonderful group of amateur but very passionate musicians, singers. It's a choir of about 40 voices. And they asked me to write a piece that would celebrate the tall ships coming to Shetland that year for the tall ships race. So I was, very excited to do something for this group that I'd heard them sing Christmas concerts and spring concerts, and I knew they were very capable musicians. So when I was in London, I met a librettist, a young Irish writer. His name's Jonathan Lenny. And Jonathan Lenny and I became very good friends. We lived quite close to each other in London, and we would often go out and discuss art and music and literature. And I knew he had dabbled in a bit of writing, so I suggested that Jonathan perhaps pen the libretto for the piece. So he came up to Shetland on vacation with us a few times and got to know the landscape and the people and the heritage of the island. And he went away and wrote a very, very colourful libretto for me to set to music.
Did he come up with it himself, or did you give him ideas?
Well, we talked about the commission. We talked about the fact that it was celebrating tall ships, celebrating the land of Shetland, the seascapes, the culture of the island, folk tunes, this kind of thing, and all that together. He then went away, and I didn't really interfere. He wrote the text, and he brought me the initial text, and we talked about the structure of it and how it worked. And we actually tweaked it ever so slightly in that it was about half the length that it is at the moment.
Okay.
So we needed it to be a little bit longer. So what he did was the end of the piece becomes quite abstract. And the way we did this in terms of his words was we took sentences from the beginning of the text and he combined them in slightly surreal and interesting ways. So for instance, the piece begins, press to your mouth, pistons of air, silent the engine, cruciform snare. And later in the piece it comes back as press to your mouth, silent the engine, pistons of air, cruciform snare. He kind of altered the structure of the sentences.
And what I find interesting is the piece starts out with words almost whispered, then low, and then loud.
Right.
And that's a surprise.
Well, the piece begins, the first 5 or 6 pages is purely spoken or
Right.
whispered or shouted,
Right.
like you said. And this, depicts if you're on a tour ship or, you're watching them leave the harbor, it's all action. I mean, which it is most of the time anyway, because people are, on lookout and they're sailing the ship. But I mean, they're getting, orders, and they're telling each other what to do, and they're making people aware of what they're up to. And it's all spoken and shouted, and there's action on board. And so I wanted the piece to begin with this sense of we're setting sail. I mean, we're everybody is doing their job, and everybody has an important thing. And what happens in the piece is that although we begin in a unison, we all whisper and shout together exactly the same rhythm, it slowly starts to break up. And each part, the tenors, basses, altos, and sopranos, begin polyrhythms. So it means that rather than it being unison, they all start to do their own thing at their own time. And again, it's this sense of ordered chaos on the
Right.
ship. All these different shouts are going on, and although it sounds like it's chaotic, it actually is very strict. I mean, people know exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and that's what happens in the piece too. And so when you hear that, all this different shouting and whispering and all these words at the beginning, what you'll hear in the music underneath is the instruments begin to play this folk song that the whole piece is based on. So Shetland's musical heritage is very folk influenced. A lot of fiddlers, a lot of accordion players, a lot of the tunes came across from Scandinavia. And so I wanted to incorporate that sense of musical history and heritage into the piece. So, from growing up, I did a lot of vamping, which is a kind of accompanying on the piano fiddlers. And so I got to know a lot of Shetland tunes. And so I think subconsciously these tunes entered my kind of musical thoughts, and I wrote my own little tune. So the piece is based on a tune very similar to a Shetland slow air, and we have an example of that right here. And that tune influences every single aspect of the piece. You'll hear it at the beginning. As we shout and whisper, the instruments come in and play a very basic version of it. And then after that, that tune is kind of taken apart, and how it works harmonically and melodically and rhythmically influences the entire piece in terms of the shape of the phrases, in terms of the harmony, things like that. And at perhaps the most profound moment of the piece, about 3/4 of the way through, the tenor and basses have just sung about the souls that are lost in shipwrecks deep down in the ocean. And the piece just kind of stops, and there's a silence, and then an offstage violin plays a rendition of this folk song. And it's a haunting moment in that there's this silence, and we're thinking about those that have lost their lives. And suddenly there's a kind of requiem type atmosphere that this solo violin, and of course there's the heritage from Shetland too, is the fiddle that plays the piece. So that happens halfway through. But so the Shetland, not just the landscapes and the skyscapes, and the fishing and all that heritage, but the music is very much part of what the piece is about as well. So the piece was originally written for chorus, piano, offstage violin, and ocean drum. And I'll talk about the ocean drum in a little while. But this new version that we're doing in May, I've added some instruments to it. So over the last 8 years that I've been working at Grace Church, I've met some wonderful, wonderful musicians. Rutland City and the surrounding area is full of incredibly talented musicians and painters, as you know.
Isn't
Mary.
that
It's
wonderful? You are
fantastic.
blessed.
We are very blessed. And so some of my closest friends that I've met over the past few years, strangely enough, play instruments that form a wind quintet. So a wind quintet is flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, and strangely horn, which is a brass instrument, but it's included in a wind quintet.
When you say horn,
setup.
is that a trumpet?
French horn. So,
A French horn.
Yeah, French
Got
horn.
it. Okay.
So I've added a wind quintet to the original lineup of Between Blue Mirrors, because it gives, not only do we have the opportunity to play and work with these wonderful, wonderful local musicians, but it adds a huge amount of color to the piece. So in Court Gettle, who plays the flute, and he's also playing piccolo in this, which is the higher flute, the flute and the piccolo have these wonderful bird-like calls.
I know.
You could
I played the flute.
There you go. So, and you can do these glissando, these slight bends of pitches, especially on the upper piccolo, that sounds just like a seagull in the mist. I mean, it's a wonderful. And if you have lots and lots of fast notes on the piccolo and the oboe too, you get these halos, these murmurs of birds. I mean, it's an amazing effect. The oboe, a little bit more hard-pitched than the flute, but again, gives amazing bird cries, but also it kind of squeaks like the squeals of an otter in the sea and
Right.
little sea creatures.
Right, I know.
The clarinet. So our oboe player is Dan Frostman, who lives up in Burlington. But Dan's wife, Amy Frostman, is a wonderful singer. And she's coming down to join us because there's a couple of solo moments in Between Blue Mirrors. And Amy will be singing some of those solos. But Dan, her husband, is our oboe player. And Dan and Amy often come down at Christmas to perform the Messiah with us. Amy's been, actually, I think we said this was like her 20th year of doing Messiah this year. It's absolutely wonderful. So
She's wonderful.
Our clarinet player is Fred Lemons, and Fred has just been on your program
Yes.
to discuss his wonderful history playing with
Yes.
the Marine Band. But so Fred is playing clarinet and also bass clarinet, which is one of my favorite instruments, very rich. It sounds, you can make it sound like little bubbles of water, but at the same time, it can leap and shriek. Like the bassoon, the bass clarinet to me sounds like barking seals.
Okay.
So I waking
All
up
right.
in Shetland sometimes on early in the summer in the morning, and you'd listen out the window and you could hear the seals barking on the seashore. So the bass clarinet and bassoon kind of mimic these larger kind of sea creatures.
All right.
down there. And of
How
course,
about the French horn?
Well, the French horn, growing up in Shetland, we have a lot of fog and a lot of mist. And
Okay.
the foghorn would sound quite, many, many times in the morning. And so, of course, the French horn gives this sense of the foghorn, but it also, it's this gleaming clash of metal, and it gives the most fantastic thunder and lightning effects. So all these instruments combine not only in their own sound world, because we're also, besides my piece, we're doing a set of sea shanties by a composer called Malcolm Arnold. And Malcolm Arnold wrote the sea shanties for the wind quintet. So that's another reason why I wanted to get the wind quintet in. So, but I've added them to my piece. We also have a lot more percussion in my piece because we have a great percussionist in town. His name is Mark Whitman. And so Mark is coming in, besides the ocean drum, he's now playing timpani and cymbals, little crotals, which are little small antique cymbals that sound like stars. And if you play them really loudly, they sound like lightning and thunder and this kind of thing. He's playing a marimba, so a large malleted instrument that if you play it with really soft sticks, it sounds just like liquid water. It's the most fantastic, really wonderful instrument. And the marimba kind of gels my piece together in a way that the piano can't. And because again of that sense, with really soft sticks, it just sounds like running water. It's a wonderful.
Is the piano used in this
The
concert?
piano is still used,
Okay.
but less than it was in the original
Okay.
because the other instruments now are coming in and adding their own color
Right.
to the piece. So, and of course the bassoon is played by Barry Cohen, who lives locally, and the French horn is Ron Wald. Ron lives over in Randolph and has come and done many concerts with us. Most recently, he played a wonderful piece by Benjamin Britten, Britten's Serenade for tenor, horn, and strings. So again, all these musicians have become really very good friends over the last 8 years, and it's a real pleasure not just to make music, but to make music among friends. I mean, it takes it to the next level, and it's really wonderful. And of course, the Rutland Area Chorus are putting a lot of work, and you're singing in it yourself, Mary, which I greatly
A
appreciate.
lot of work.
It is certainly a tough piece, and when we did it in Shetland,
Right, that's it. You said it.
when we did it in Shetland with the Choral Society, this is something they'd never done a piece quite like this. They, Christmas concerts, and they'd done mainstream repertoire, but to do a brand new piece by a young composer, it took a lot of time, and we would have rehearsals where I would explain what's going on, and I think that's the same with the Rutland Area Chorus. I think as long as there's a kind of understanding of what the composer's trying to put across, it certainly helps.
And you explained that well.
Put things together, yeah. So, and it was performed also in London back in, I think, 2004. by a wonderful choral society down there. And I did it with my old choir in Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Compline Choir. And it's been very interesting to work with all these 4 different choirs, all which have taken their own kind of personalities to the piece, which I think is a really wonderful thing as a composer to have that different kind of interpretation, as the piece goes along. So talking about those different instruments that we use, the bassoon and the bass clarinet doing the sounds of the seals and the thunder, with Mark playing the bass drum and the cymbals, and the wonderful lightness of the flute and the oboe singing the songs of the birds, and the offstage violin giving the sense of the Shetland heritage and culture to the piece. The piece ends with an ocean drum. Which is a wonderful, wonderful instrument in that it's basically a small drum full of ball bearings. And if you slowly tilt it...
Yes. Yes.
It sounds just like the water...
The tide is coming.
...tiding over the pebbles on a beach. And the piece ends with... Jonathan Lenny takes the sense of a seascape and moves it into the stars and the constellations, and we leave the planet Earth and we move into the sea of the cosmos. Yes. And he talks about the stars and the cosmic dust. And the sopranos and altos end up singing the word stars, and they disappear into the S, the last letter of the word stars, and that gets overtaken by the ocean drum. And it's a wonderful atmospheric moment at the very end where you just
and
hear
so this is the ocean drum that's used?
This is the ocean drum.
It's not a bigger
used.
version.
No, this is
it.
This is mine, and I've carried it with me for years.
Okay.
So I always bring my own ocean drum, to the text. But there are some other moments in the piece that are worth mentioning too. There's a lot of the piece is about storms and the violence of the weather in Shetland. Shetland lies, like I said, right way up in the middle of the North Atlantic, and it's the Gulf Stream comes across from North America, and it kind of hits right there where Shetland is, and that sense of warmth and the cold of the Arctic makes it quite a turbulent, violent place to live. There's many storms. 70, 80 mile an hour winds is quite normal. Normal, yeah. So a lot of the piece, depicts this violence, and there's some moments where the piccolos and the oboes are playing just triple fortissimo, and Mark is bashing away at the cymbals, and the choir is just very, very loud. And there's an example of that right here. Other moments are when it's not storming, it's usually misty. Okay, so very rarely does Shetland get a good day. Occasionally we have sunshine, but if it's not storm, it's mist and fog. And so there's moments in the piece where it's very, very still, but very strange, mysterious piano chords, marimbas doing the slow, quiet malleting. And the court on the piccolo is doing these little lip glissers that sound like seagulls in the fog. And sopranos and altos talk about clumsy gulls floating around the sea arches. And what happens out of the gloom, you'll hear the piano create these really tall octaves. That's if you're in a boat looking down and looking up against the sea cliffs, you'll see these huge 600-foot walls of stone appear out of the gloom. And you can hear that in this little part of the piece. Here's another example of that right here. there are various moments in the piece that, I think I try quite colourfully to show the different seascapes and landscapes of Shetland. And a big part of that also was going fishing with my dad. My dad was a Shetlander. He grew up there, was born on Shetland and grew up there. And one of his passions was lobster fishing. He actually was a captain with the Merchant Navy for many years. So he traveled around the world with my mum, captaining these enormous ships. And when me and my sisters came about, we all moved back to Shetland so that we could, be a family unit. And when I was, 8, 9, 10 years old, he and I would go off on his little boat and would go lobster fishing. There's a picture of my dad right there, dropping creels into the ocean. And I wasn't passionate about fishing, to be honest. I enjoyed going, and it was fun to be with my dad.
But you became passionate about music.
I became passionate about music through going fishing with my dad, because when I was on those little boats and I was noticing the cliffs and the mist and the texture of the landscape of Shetland from out on the little boat, it stirred my imagination in a way that none of those orchestration lessons at college made happen. Because I suddenly saw in the landscapes and the textures of the sea and the land the sound of the instruments, and how music should be written. And when we were dropping creels into the ocean, and you'd watch the creel go down through the fathoms of water, the way the creel morphed and mutated as the water covered it, and also the meter and the flow of the sea, inspired and made me very aware of how meter flows in music. And so those times with my dad were just as important, orchestration and instrumental, how to write for instruments, as all the years when I was at college studying it with the big, scores. So those moments with my dad off in the ocean were instrumental in me understanding, how to write music and just to create sounds in my mind and colors and things like that. So I owe him a huge amount in terms of the structure of the piece and the colors of the instruments and that kind of thing.
All right. So the concert is Sunday, May 3rd at 4 p.m. at Grace Church, Between Blue Mirrors.
Right. So
Sunday, May 3rd at 4 p.m.
Yep, with the Rotten Area Chorus and the Grace Festival Wind Quintet, and of course Mark Whitman playing. And the concerts, not only will it feature my piece, but also, like I said, Mark Whitman's playing the marimba, and he's learning a wonderful piece by an American composer. The piece is called Waterfall. So obviously the whole concert is water themed.
It's water.
So we'll hear a solo marimba piece. We'll hear the sea shanties by Malcolm Arnold, and we'll also hear some songs by Roger Quilter. Roger Quilter is an American composer working around the 1930s to the 1960s, and Amy Frostman will sing those. I've actually arranged those for oboe for her husband to play, and for Fred Lemons to play on the clarinet. So they'll be for clarinet, oboe, Amy Frostman, and piano. So it'll be a wonderful concert of quite diverse music. And of course, we're in landlocked Vermont, but I think it's important that we broaden the horizons and always remember that the sea...
Well, so many of us love the ocean.
We do love the ocean. Of course, we have Lake Champlain just on that. So, I mean,
we're
not really that landlocked. Yeah. So it's going to be good. So, yeah. So
all right, now there is another concert at Grace Church.
We have concerts every month there is a concert of some kind at Grace Church, if not a couple of concerts a month. We're very blessed and fortunate to... like I said, have wonderful musicians that want to come and play in our wonderful sanctuary, which has a fantastic acoustic. So the next concert after Between Blue Mirrors will be our annual handbell concert. We have some wonderful handbell choirs in Vermont, and some very local. Karen James, who works at the Methodist Church, her handbell choir, Bells of Joy, have joined us the last couple of years to offer a concert around Pentecost in mid-May. So this May, it's May 17th.
May 17th at 4 p.m.
At 4 o'clock,
at the church.
We will give a concert of handbell music. But this year, besides Karen's choir and our own choir, we'll be joined by one of the foremost choirs in Vermont, Northern Bronze.
And where are they?
They're based up in Burlington.
Okay.
But they'll be coming down to join us, and so we'll be having 3 handbell choirs offer joint pieces, pieces with the Grace Church Sanctuary Choir, and solo pieces. And it'll probably be based...
Oh, so it's a choral concert as well as handbells.
The Grace Church Handbell Choir often performs with our own choir.
Right.
So I think we'll include a piece that we've been, singing and playing recently in church, because it's good to have those crossovers too. But the other choirs will perform with our handbell choir, and we'll do that. And it'll be a benefit concert for a local charity, and we do a lot of that at Grace Church too. Looking towards the fall, we always do a benefit concert in October for a local charity, and then in November we'll be welcoming back Helen Lyons, who is a soprano up in the Burlington area. Helen's also singing Between Blue Mirrors with us. But Helen and her accompanist, Elaine Greenfield, will be back to offer a concert of songs by women composers in November. And then, of course, in December is the annual Messiah concert
Which is usually the first Sunday in December,
It has been for about 75 years. However, in the last couple of years, we've moved it to the second weekend in December. This year is a year where we celebrate the Grace Church Composition Competition. Something close to my heart, obviously, because it incorporates new music, and we invite composers from all over the world to submit pieces that we choose the winning piece to premiere with the Grace Church, with the Messiah, and the Grace Church Rutland Area Chorus. The last 3 years we've had the last 3 competitions, because it's biannual, we've had some wonderful pieces from all over the world, from New Zealand, from over in California, and then the first year was won by a local Vermont composer. So we hope that composers of any age, but will submit pieces that we can then choose and use to do that. But I know the Rutland Area Chorus really enjoy promoting new music and encouraging composers to write for us. And we'll perform that alongside Handel's masterpiece, The Messiah, and that takes us up to the end of
the year
2026. Yeah, but like I said, we have concerts throughout each month from September through May. So we're planning, the new year.
And you said something about having the baked potato dinner.
Yeah, so usually in February, when we're all desperate for community, and in the dark months of Vermont, it's a wonderful time to bring people together. So usually at the beginning of February, I do a Shetland night where we show pictures of Shetland, and we do some Shetland traditional dancing, and even
I danced because you got me up.
Wonderful, Mary. And you danced very well.
No, I did.
No, you really did. It was wonderful. And so your footwork, especially, I thought was almost professional. It was. But and then we do a baked potato dinner. So we feed people potatoes, and But this year, next summer, we're planning another choir tour. A couple of years ago, we went to Ireland. We had a very successful tour of Ireland. It was a lot of fun. And so next year, we're planning on going to the UK, or to London, and close to where my family live, in Wiltshire, around Stonehenge and Salisbury, that area. But so I think in February we're going to do a preview of that trip, and I'll show some pictures of the venues we're going to be singing at, and the various interesting castles and things like that will be in the area that we'll probably visit. So we'll do a preview of the tour next summer. So it'll be a lot of fun.
And the baked potato dinner is always fun.
It
is. Baked potato. With toppings.
Right. It's it not only is it a very substantial meal that fills you up, you can actually produce it for very low cost.
Right.
But potatoes don't cost that much, and where we get them from, you get enormous potatoes. And so it's like feeding the 5,000. I mean, it's a wonderful way to, and of course toppings can vary, and they do. I mean, we have a whole a slew of very, very delicious toppings.
Beans and vegetables, and
everything
meat
you can
cheese,
imagine. And something for everybody.
Right.
So we want to cater for everybody. And it's all organized by the Grace Church Music Committee, which is a group of very, very passionate and committed members of Grace Church that help me run this very vibrant and wonderful music ministry at Grace Church. So we are certainly very blessed at Grace to have the ability to, and the talent to put on music for the Rutland and the Rutland community area. You know, it's a huge delight of my life that we can, put these different concerts on. There's concerts for everybody at Grace Church, from classical music to jazz to folk music. To musical theatre, you know, everything is there, and we love doing this, and we really appreciate the support that we get from the Rutland community in putting all this music on. And of course, giving back to the community is a huge part of what we do at Grace too. So the benefit concerts, the various ministries that we.
I should mention that these are free will offerings. No tickets required ahead of time.
No tickets, and some of them aren't even. We don't even ask for free will offerings. You know, it's the only venue in Vermont that you can get this kind of music for absolutely no cost.
Right.
And so please come and make the most of this. Come and enjoy the music, especially on May 3rd.
And also, come to church. The music is every Sunday at Grace Church.
Every Sunday at
Alastair
Grace Church.
Stout, director.
But wonderful to talk to you, Mary. Again,
wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you for inviting me in to talk
You're
about
welcome.
Between Blue Mirrors. And,
Always enjoy
and for all you do for us. Yeah.
Thank you for coming, and thank you very much for watching.